Thank you so much for joining me today. For the folks at home, this is Audrey Wyckoff. She is a dear friend of mine. We ride horses together. She's my neighbor in Boulder, Colorado, and she's an incredible businesswoman who has been creating a social ecosystem here at Yellow Barn, really a community hub, as well as doing amazing regenerative land works. And I am so excited to chat with her today.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
So I want to kick it off and just have you talk a little bit about what Yellow Barn is, the land we're on, and how you came in to be a steward of this place.
Yeah, it's been a very circuitous route of actually ending up here and what is now called Yellow Barn. It was originally called Autumn Hill as a equestrian center when my parents bought the property back in 2001. And I got to grow up riding horses here, and this place was full of different animals. We had goats and sheep, alpacas, a tortoise. And it was just incredible to actually grow up on this land and getting true free reign to explore every nook and cranny. It's 100 acres, and many of the buildings here have been historically landmarked. The property was originally homesteaded in 1865 by the Allen brothers, and it used to be a dairy farm. So we have photos from way back in the day that show that this highway, Highway 36, was just a dirt road. And the yellow house here was actually brought in and ordered from a Sears catalog. So brought in on train and then delivered by wagon. And so it's just incredible to understand the history of this place. And even before that, this was all indigenous land of the Ute, Cheyenne, and Arapaho tribes that stewarded this entire region, working with the buffalo and planting food, and truly is like the first regenerative farmers. So coming back to all of this and actually understanding what we're doing now is really just paying homage to what true stewardship actually looks like, being in relationship with land, understanding what it means to be in harmony with an ecosystem, not trying to control or dominate nature. That's been a really big key piece of what we're seeing this place come back to life. Like the natural ecosystem and the wildlife is just blossoming here in tandem with the chickens and the pigs and the cows. So yeah, it's been a really beautiful journey to land back here. I came back in 2020, kind of right in the midst of the COVID pandemic after having lived in Boston for the previous couple of years. And when I landed here, the place had actually been fallow for 6 or 7 years. My parents had been trying to find buyers for the property. All the horses had left, and I myself was never ever going to come back to Boulder, never wanted to come back to the farm, and ultimately found myself here again. And we have just been sprinting for like the last 5 years of really building this into a community hub and many more things on top of that.
Yeah. And you came at this, like when you were in Boston and prior to Yellow Barn, you had a business background. You had acquired, owned, managed businesses in different sectors, and that was really your lens. How did that shape how you approached Yellow Barn, and how has that been like an ally and potentially in some instances a detriment in terms of what you're building here?
Yeah, man, I think coming here with that perspective, my dad was an entrepreneur. So I think growing up around that energy, you know, my friends would ask me what my dad did, and I said he was an entrepreneur, and I didn't even know what that meant for most of my life. And then when I lived in Boston, I started working with a good friend running a moving business called Small Haul. And that was just like my first real deep dive into this world. I just worked with like small startups and just knowing that everything was like very much bootstrapped, but Small Haul was like my boots on the ground MBA. And that was so much more than just running a moving company. It was project managing software. It was building up a brand, dealing with website design, customer service, to bookkeeping, to payroll, hiring, firing, training, everything. And so that really was such an interesting, like mind-opening expansion of understanding, wow, this is a living ecosystem. If you stop paying attention to this, it starts to decay and fall apart. And like growing this system from the ground up and figuring out all these checks and balances is that you almost have like a dashboard of all these little control mechanisms. And if you toggle things here and there, like something would break over here, or you'd have to fix it, or it would have this effect over here that you didn't expect. And that was so fascinating to me. And I think I'm very much now recognizing that I'm a systems designer. Like my brain just thinks in like geometry and systems and how do we keep things organized. And so coming to the farm was just this incredible sandbox of opportunity to take everything that I had just learned and applying it to this blank canvas. There was nothing happening here. And so we built the brand that is now Yellow Barn. We built up the website and the social media presence. We started bringing people in. We got connected with DAR. That was like the game changer of actually getting connected with these folks that do regenerative agriculture just down the street from us. And they were just starting to get into consulting for larger land projects. DAR is short for Drylands Agroecology Research. And I got to meet Nick and Marissa when I first moved back here from Boston. And we just all started working together. It really just started out at Elk Run with a big whiteboard, and we were just trading time. It was a lot of horse trading where they would come out and they would consult with us, and then I would come and I would help try to figure out what's going on at Elk Run, and just applying all my operational skills to their organization and them helping us apply all their land and regenerative skills to the farm. Yeah.
And as you started to create on this blank canvas, what was the co-creative relationship with the land like? Like, what was that discussion, and what did you notice in building and working with a natural system versus working with like a more mechanical system in an entrepreneurial business? Like, how did that shift your mindset of systems thinking?
I actually found that they were really similar. So as I got to like sit with Nick and we'd have these like long conversations and he'd show me these incredible maps of everything that he was doing with the farm, designing the silvopasture and how the cattle would rotate through, and just what land management meant for him. And, you know, something he said once really stuck with me is that no 2 square feet of land are the same. And that really, like, for me, you understood that everything is like based on pattern recognition, where nothing is the exact same, but that you can start to see the patterns that scale up and scale down. And within like a business system, seeing that, you know, the way that Nick was designing the laterals so that the water could flow to the trees was exactly the same way that I was thinking about how do we need the money to actually flow through a business system so that people could get paid on time and that customers felt like they were getting a fair price for the value. And all of these little things that were pattern recognition across the board. And the more that I got to talk to Nick and Marissa, I really started to see this idea of like social soil develop, that you could take completely barren land and actually start to regenerate it, to restore it and bring it back to life, where it could be totally barren. We had houses here for years. That soil was incredibly compacted. It was really dry. It wasn't really fruitful. You really could not have planted crops there and actually seen that grow. So there was a lot that had to happen over the couple years to rebuild the organic matter, to actually rebuild the soil health and the vitality and the nutrient density so that things could grow. And I started seeing that in relationships, that you could have relationships that maybe had fracture or trust had eroded. And I think we were all seeing that on a macro scale with COVID, is that trust had just been completely eroded. No one trusted each other. No one knew who to turn to. And that was like the first impetus where everyone went back to like their home nucleus. Like most people went home and they went back to their families. And within this time period where no one was really out and about in the world, you really had to figure out what was your micro community. And so that idea of social soil started to really develop, and I really got fascinated with Dunbar's number of 150. And what does it mean to have 150 key relationships, knowing that like our human software is really only operating at that level still, that we're not really able to compute the mass amount of stimulus that we have in the world right now, that like we're short-circuiting our brains all the time because there are too many connections that we're trying to maintain, too many links, and that trust is completely eroded. So we're operating in a system that relies on money and incredible amounts of regulation in order to keep the peace, so to speak. And so that kind of just was my fascination of how do you build a microcosm that is really focused on honing in those 150 core relationships, and that's kind of like a spiraling pattern out from you. So my 150 would look different from your 150, but those have interlinking sectors, like the fact that we both know Nick and Marissa. And so all those little ties start to show you that all of our human relationships really look a lot like mycelium. And this entire network that's under the ground in the soil tells us a lot about how energy needs to move and how reciprocity works. And the way that you can build really, really healthy, dense social soil if you have ways that people can engage in community. potlucks and organizing events and meals. I think that was like a really big thing. So it was just beautiful to start to see that, you know, the business world and the social world and the land world actually have a lot more in common than I think most of us understand it to nowadays.
And can you tell me a little bit more about, like, as we're sitting here, there's like kids playing in the background, there's someone behind me that's cold plunging in your sauna, there's people coming in and out. And at the same time, there's cattle grazing in your front pasture, and you have a very active garden. Can you tell me a little bit about how the production regenerative agriculture side of your business and the social regenerative side of your business are interwoven, and like what is the flywheel of Yellow Barn and how you guys operate as an entity, and like what are your offerings, and how did you get there?
Yeah, there is all this activity happening around us, which is just amazing. You know, it's coming from like ground zero where there was nothing happening a couple of years ago to suddenly there's all this life. And I think what I really started to understand deeply is that you really need holistic systems. You can't have farming operating in a vacuum or just events or just these little components, because you start to inherently create an extractive system. Nature teaches us in every facet of the way that she designs is you need biodiversity. You need a bunch of different things happening. And I think a lot of people thought we were totally crazy for doing all these different things, but it was like we would start one thing and be like, oh gosh, but we need this program, but we need events, but we need the farming. And all of these things started to come to life in tandem. Whereas I think most business people would tell you, focus on one thing and one thing only. And I couldn't do that. Like, we just had to have all of these different things working in tandem in order to actually create economic resilience in a big way. That the farming, you know, DAR is in such a beautifully unique role here as a nonprofit where their focus is actually the soil health more than the food production to sell. And as I was observing that system over the last couple of years, it really showed us that you really have to focus on the health of the soil. That's where all the nutrient density comes from. That's where all the health comes from. Everything else is a byproduct. The meat, the produce, the community is all a byproduct of healthy soil and healthy community. And for us, realizing we have an incredible venue here that should be shared. We have weddings, we do private events. That's like our primary income source that really stabilizes the farm. We have a small business incubator and a bunch of other ag focused and ag adjacent companies that base their operations here. And so all of those business tenants paying in rent helps create a lot more economic stabilization that gets us through the entire season. Everything is very, very seasonal for events and farming. So having something that's consistent was really important. And then having residents that also live here, some of whom actually work on the property and some who just live here and enjoy the space. And then education programming was really key. You know, growing up here as a kid, it was just such a gift to be able to be in relationship to nature. And so making sure that other kids programs could have summer camps here and actually have a whole trajectory of growing up on the farm felt really, really critical. And then we have a whole membership base that's really focused on health and wellness, having like, you know, your events might be a party of people that come in from out of town for a wedding and they're here for a day. But then you've got people who live down the street and they're neighbors and they want consistency in their community space. And there's a lot of talk right now about third spaces. You've got your first space, which is your home. You've got your second space, which is typically your work, maybe an office. And then the third spaces, we don't have as many of now. Right now, it's like bars and things like that. But having a third space, which is where you go to gather. And that could be the sauna. It could be the farm. It could be all these variety of things that are now popping up. And that felt really important for us, is having that be like the backbone where we could plant like the big weddings and the big events. Those book way far out, but then all the little community gatherings kind of fill in the gaps. And so the potlucks and the yoga classes and the sauna, having a marketplace on site, co-working space in the barn, all of that was like just all like the soft tissue that kind of filled in everything so that this place actually became filled with life. And that 150 community base, that's really where we want to max out the membership, is knowing that we're not trying to infinitely scale. We know that we want to fill capacity here, feed as many people as we can. Those 150 slots really ends up equating to about 100, like 300 people within 150 households. Then that tells us how much food we're trying to grow. That tells DAR, if we're doing events and we're feeding families, how much do you have to plant in the gardens? How many cows can the land support, both in the constraint of what's healthy for the land and also what we can feed? And how many pigs and how many tours and programs should we be filling in? And then it all just feeds in on itself. It becomes this beautiful ecosystem that has feedback loops that just circulate dollars and energy, and our staff, can have their hands in a variety of different things. They're not just stuck in a cubicle office. They get to do a wide range of things that demonstrate their different gifts and skills and give them direction. Because I think a lot of people right now are pretty lost in, career fields and where they should end up. And yeah, it's kind of merges all.
And so if I want to become a member of Yellow Barn, like what does that look like? And, I know we've talked a lot about like the stock market and like the different programs that you have going on. So what does a membership here look like?
Yeah, man, it's been a whole iteration of just beta testing things. And we're in our first pilot season of actually launching 2 membership models. One is called a social share and one is called the soil share. And coming from Boston and very much like a finance bro, business partner, Charles, who has just like really taught me everything I now know about business and about the stock market, the actual stock market. We came here and we wanted to develop something that was a little bit more tongue-in-cheek, that kind of played to the idea of the actual stock market, but we called this the corn stock market. And that stock market is our little marketplace here. That is what you can get a social or a soil share with, which includes a food share. So that's pork and beef from DAR, so cattle and pigs that were raised on the land here from last season. It is produce that you get to pick from like a list of 10 to 15 items each week, and you order what you want, and we go pick it up from a farm down the street at Sunburn Farm. We pick it up and we bring it here, and people can pick up their food share. And then there's the social share. And the social share is very much focused on community building, that social soil. So getting half price puffin sauna tickets and passes, or taking free yoga classes that the public would generally pay for. Having coverage for all immunity meals here with Schlop Stop, which are the same guys that do the produce from Sunburn Farm. Having co-working spaces in the barn, having access to the little marketplace that has vendors that are from just around the corner. We've got a beautiful partnership with an organization called We Don't Waste, and they rescue groceries from Whole Foods and Trader Joe's and Kroger's and all of these different grocery stores, and they drop off like 1 to 2 pallets each week. And so all of that is like our little micro food bank, and that's always free to all of our members. So all of these little tiny value propositions that we can create, just like ways that people can engage, that bring them out to the farm for just like a consistent space that they can be a part of. And the membership models are in their pilot season. It kind of pays to be an early investor. The social share, I think right now is $55 a month or $275 for a 6-month pass. The soil share is $350 per month or $18.25 for a 6-month pass. And that's like all the food you'll need pretty much. We try to really make like it's the basic building blocks. You can do an add-on for a flock share if you want chicken and eggs. And, you and I both have a milk share from down the street. So if anyone ever signed up for a milk share and they wanted to be able to come pick it up here at Yellow Barn, the milk share folks share the same plot of land with the produce folks. So we're going there anyway. So the entire idea was, how do we aggregate all of these different CSA or herd share, milk share models into a social or soil share model that aggregates here.
And it's so important, because I know I've had moments of trying to shop locally, and it's like, okay, my milk share is on Tuesday in Longmont, and then my, meat share pickup is on Thursdays over here. And it can become a full-time job trying to support local farmers. I know that's the feedback we've gotten. It's been so hard for our local farming community to actually get food in our local grocery stores, which I know is like a bigger problem that myself and some other people are working to solve. But I think what's beautiful about being able to shop here is that you're not just shopping. This is infinitely better than a grocery store. Like you're kind of solving the problem of being able to come to one hub and one place for a farm shop. And you're also creating a community space that, it feels more akin to a farmer's market, but like, even more closely knit and supportive. So it's a beautiful gift.
Yeah, I think that was the idea. It's like, I think you've been hearing this, I've been hearing this. We've worked a lot with like the Flatirons Farmers Coalition, and they put out a big survey that just asked a lot of the local farms, like, what are the biggest issues that you're dealing with? And a lot of them said distribution, getting into local markets, like having an all-year marketplace. If the farmers market is only 2 days out of the week and only for certain months of the season, how do farmers sell all year? And just accessibility. It was hard for people to find them. If you did want to sign up for a milk share or a CSA, you kind of almost have to find it by word of mouth. There isn't really an easy way to find that online. And a lot of the farmers don't want to deal with setting up a website and dealing with inventory, and they kind of find themselves in that world. And something I think we mentioned right before we started chatting is that a lot of farmers get into this line of work out of the love for the lands. And that was what we really saw here. It's like a lot of the farmers didn't really want to deal with the business side of stuff. So was there a way that we could create like a centrally decentralized model where everyone could hold a little piece and together we could create something that was bigger than the sum of its parts? And if my passion and my background is in operations and logistics and distribution and business, can I take that skill set and apply it to like the base layer of this entire project so that what DAR produces, they don't have to hire someone to do all the sales and marketing and track inventory and deal with all that stuff. We could deal with all of that. And so that's kind of what's led into the stock market being like, it's a distribution company that's really aggregating all of these little CSA models, herd shares, what have you, and then doing the last mile distribution so that people can get food delivered directly to their doorstep. And then Picky Pig Compost is like the sister company to that picks up everyone's food scraps. So whether it was a business or it's an at-home pickup or a community drop-off hub, people could get their food scraps collected, and in the same motion, while we're driving out to pick up your food scraps, we can swap out for your food. So you get your food delivered, you get your food scraps collected, all the food scraps come back to the farm, they feed Dart's pigs or one of our other good friends down the street, Chris Corba, and that supplements all their feed. So if farmers aren't needing to spend their own precious time running around trying to pick up food scraps from all these locations, which tends to be relatively inconsistent, and maybe some weeks they don't need all that food waste, but the grocery store still has it and they need to figure out a solution for it. So we tried to fill that gap for both the farmers and the commercial clients in the community. And we built up a really cool partnership with Nude Foods. And Nude Foods is another zero waste little grocery store that has everything in glass jars. And we do their home deliveries for all of their online orders. And then we're getting all their members to sign up for Picky Pig Compost. And then we can offer free food delivery. They don't have to pay for that delivery fee every single week now if they sign up for Picky Pig. So it's how do we figure out like this entire mycelial network now as we're talking about business that starts to extend out to the broader reaches of community. So that if you've got your farms, which are like the heart, they're like creating that rhythm and the pulse, and there's all this resource that needs to move out of the farm. And then the network becomes that artery system, that mycelial network that's moving resource back and forth and bringing resource out and then bringing waste back in to be processed into soil.
It's so cool because so often we think of convenience as being degenerative, like we look at Amazon or we look at, all these different, and it's more waste. And I think what a beautiful turn of its head to say, hey, you actually get free delivery if we pick up your waste. Like that's just, it just goes to show, I think we're starting to understand, and we're getting to a point in our economy where things are so stretched thin and where we're really starting to feel the resource stretch, that these circular models that actually feed on each other. Like I do hope that what you're doing for a lot of people is this light bulb moment of that, these regenerative business models can actually be more economically viable than the degenerative convenient business models that we've been operating in, and offer just as much convenience. And I think that that's people's biggest fear when they think about it, is, oh, it's going to take more time, it's not going to be as convenient, or it's not going to taste as good, or I'm going to have to pay way more for it. And I think that like you showing that there can be a model. If you actually look at a holistic perspective, it has everything that you need, and you don't have to give up so much, as these sort of piecemeal fragmented systems might have to.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think that's a lot of what we talk about here is like, how do you make something that is truly regenerative? And I think the way that the systems in the macro world are designed right now is to mass produce something. If you look at like how we're producing corn and soy and wheat, all of that is generally genetically modified and it's monocrops. And ultimately what you're doing when you're manufacturing food at that scale is you're slowly bankrupting your soil. And only once it's totally bankrupt do you actually understand the implications of that and how that affects both a community, the ecosystem, the economy, that you can no longer get anything out of it. And especially our own health. Like there's no nutrient value in soil that is totally depleted. And you keep having to modify the crop itself, its genetic code, in order to get it to grow in these environments and to be resistant to pesticides and all of these different things. But if you can figure out the way to integrate things, you actually start to see a massive cost savings, because what you were spending in pesticides, you're now actually not needing to spend at all, because you've got natural systems that are getting rid of all your pests, whether that's like planting marigolds or it's figuring out the way that planting corn, beans, and squash can both be nitrogen fixing and keep your soils moist and create like those long vines or long stems for the vines to wrap around. There's so many ways that we can do this that is actually much more cost effective and convenient. And I think that's what we were looking at, is like Amazon is pretty much the epitome of convenience right now. Myself included. Like, I don't think that any of us are totally outside of that system right now. It's too hard to operate outside of it completely. But what we're trying to do is just build a parallel path. Not something that directly fights the current system, but runs alongside it, that people can step in and out of. And as long as you've got that pathway, the more that people are kind of slowly stepping into, and the more convenient we can make it, in the long run, you're actually going to see that cost of regenerative agriculture go way down, that access to that food go way down. The access go up, but the cost of it all going down, because we're able to stack functions. And I think that's a big thing that I was like studying with this moving company, is that we dealt with really small jobs. We weren't dealing with like giant house moves. So how do you make a small job profitable and economically efficient? You had to stack your routes really, really tight, and making everything really, really efficient is what gives you that profitability. If you can do that in an ecosystem that doesn't actually have to extract from the land because you're trying to pull too much out of one thing, you're pulling a little bit from all of these different things. So the idea with taking the moving company and building a branch out in Colorado means that we now have an influx of trucks that are totally equipped. They spend most of their life cycle making money with the moving company. That's kind of our bread and butter. And then once the trucks are ready to retire, they go to the compost business. And the compost business is able to stack functions with the food delivery and the compost. And, if someone else needs a delivery going some other direction, we can move an item for them. So that kind of functionality means that we're creating circular systems that slowly bring down the overarching cost for the consumer, for the producer, and for the business themselves. Trying to just make money on just the food or just the distribution alone isn't really economical. But if you can stack all of those different things, we're saving a lot in terms of marketing, because we're just partnering with other small scale distributors that need the delivery aspect, and then all of their customers just sign up for compost. So,
no, it makes so much sense. And I bet that there's a lot of communities and producers out there that are wishing they had an Ajre and a Yellow Barn, because I feel so lucky to be a part of this community. And we have such a strong producer community. We have such a strong local food movement here. We have such strong awareness and buy-in. And, you as sort of this linchpin of, being a part of the system and helping to think about how do we stack functions and how do we make this more economical. What advice do you have for other communities or producers that maybe don't have a Yellow Barn and an Ajre built into their community, but they're wanting to figure out how to create some of the functionality that you've created? Like what playbook or advice do you have for them?
I think the motto I have lived by is that the most organized team wins. You can't not be organized nowadays. And I think just like figuring out how do you build, like if you're going to go into town for something, why not make sure that you're going into town to do a bunch of different things, not just that one thing. And I think building in that little bit of awareness all the time with all of your movements means that you save a ton of time in the long run. If you can just think about, what do I need to do for this week? Do I need to go get my milk share? Do I need to go drop off something at the laundromat? Do I need to go into town for the supplemental groceries? Trying to batch all that activity, that's been a huge thing for us. And I think, for my own like core value is, this gets a little bit into the woo-woo, but what I think of is like the geometric principles of how information and attention is organized. And how do you do that in such a simple way that my number one is always coming back to, where is my energy and my attention focused? Is that in the right direction? Am I talking when maybe I should be listening? Am I focused on the thing that needs the most attention right now and is most urgent and important? Is my energy in the positive or is it in the negative? Am I maybe in a space of like fear and contraction where I'm actually pulling energy and kind of being an energetic vacuum or a vampire in a way, where if I can shift my energy in a different direction, then I can actually start producing it, that other people around me actually feel energized by that. And I think a lot of it just comes down to that we've almost been in like an attention deficit in our society, is that we're looking for external validation of our own existence because we don't really have these community nodes. Can we start to internally source that energy and internally validate what our needs are, and then have these small conversations that reinforce that I can pay attention to what you're saying and you can pay attention to what I'm saying, and we both feel seen. And then that starts to create this energetic feedback loop that's positive versus negative and sucking energy in. So I just try to follow that as a general guideline, and then it kind of builds up from there just based on different levels of patterns. That helps me understand what equilibrium is.
I think it makes so much sense. And I think helping producers understand, or, people that are trying to do this work understand, like, hey, I can't do it all overnight, but can I start to stack functions, or can I start to build a community in a way that is synergistic, and just taking it that one little step at a time. And then, when these veins or opportunities come in of like, oh, that's another place for synergy, like looping it into your step and focusing on that. I think it's such good advice. I want to switch gears a little bit to a topic of conversation that I think is near and dear to both of our hearts, which is, there's this massive health and wellness movement that keeps growing, that so many people are bought into, and there's all these nodes off of it, the biohacking movement and this or that. And, people that are focused on regenerative agriculture, I feel like have been in this somewhat fringe segment of the population. And people that are in it, we understand why we're in it, and we understand the health and wellness benefits of it. But I've noticed recently that there's scientific papers that are coming out that are talking about how community and connection directly impact your physical health metrics and your longevity, and not just your happiness, but actually like your core physical health. And that, showing the importance of nutrient density of food. And so I would love to shift the conversation a little bit and talk about what you've learned about health in this process of building this ecosystem that is Yellow Barn, and why it's so important to be having these conversations.
Yeah, that's such a good question. I mean, I think it all comes down to figuring out equilibrium. And I think so much of this is actually tied to our nervous system. And when your nervous system can be regulated, all of these other little pieces kind of fall into place. And I think we could go way down the extreme of all the biohacking and eating all the supplements and doing all the saunas and cold plunges. But if your nervous system isn't totally regulated, all that stuff like is only doing minimal amounts of good. And that social connection is key. We are inherently social creatures, and watching TikTok or Instagram is not our form of connection. It's that quick dopamine hit, but it's not actually like meeting the needs of having a good conversation or sitting around a fire and like listening to stories. So how do you get all of these little pieces to come together? I think that's why like community spaces are so critical. This is like the container. If you can just be plopped in the container, all of the other things kind of start to self-organize. So being able to have access to good food, that nutrient-dense food, again, comes right back to the soil. It's what the cows are eating off the land, which is the grass that's grown from really healthy soil. So how do you have all of these things coming together? If you just have the biohacking, you'll do well and you'll probably live a pretty solid life, but maybe you're still not feeling settled in your system. And I think nature is really like the biggest medicine for that. If you can just be in spaces that you can sit next to the creek, you can hear kids laughing in the background, you can feel like you're a part of something. You know, I think there was a great study I read that just talks about like that little family nucleus, that the mother's really the one that's co-regulating with the baby, and that the father's really coming in to help co-regulate the mother. And then if the mother's having to co-regulate the father and the baby, they've gotten out of whack. And that just goes back to this idea of equilibrium. If you've got all of these little variables that are all trying to find what is equilibrium for us, knowing that someone's always going to be out of coherence, essentially, how do you get everything to come together in a way that creates harmonization and effectively acting like a tuning fork? And if you can do that and you can really start to ground yourself and your partner can ground themselves, and you can co-regulate anyone else in your community, especially someone who's coming in that's dealing with like deep mental health stuff that they're trying to work through. If you can create a safe space where someone can actually feel like they can go in through that catharsis that's usually needed, I think that's a lot of what we're almost avoiding, is that we don't want to look at the scary stuff. Maybe we don't want to look at the trauma, and we don't want to actually have to go through the deep, dark night of the soul. We want to solve it with the biohacking or the saunas. And it's all part of it. I think a big part of this is like actually that process of turning inside out and like cleaning everything, and this idea of composting. You know, you have to move the compacted emotions that get stuck up. And if they get stuck and they stagnate, they actually start to cause illness in the body. And you start to see that manifest as like cricks in the neck or stomach pains or ulcers or things like that. All of these health issues that we're combating, like cancer and like celiac disease, all of these different things are really a product of the extreme high stress environment that we live in, the food that we're eating, the lack of community connection. You know, all of these different things are coming together, and it's really hard to pinpoint one of those things as the problem that we're trying to combat. So the solution to it is a deeply holistic, integrative medicine, all of these different things coming together. So that ideally you're doing preventative work and not reactive, trying to problem solve something that's already popped up.
Yeah. No, I hear so much that, you know, being healthy has become so expensive. And I understand why that is so easy to believe, because if all that you're doing is shopping at Whole Foods and scrolling on Instagram for the latest biohacking gadget, some of which I've bought, I'll admit it, then yeah, that's a very expensive way to go about wellness. But I think that we're kind of, when you approach it from such a fragmented space and you're trying to pull this from here and this from here, you're not actually realizing the synergies of a holistic system that actually bring health and wellness. You know, you're trying to piece together. It's like operating in the fragmented monoculture that we see everywhere else. It's extractive. And I think that what I've seen in being in this community with you and spending more time on this land and with the children and with, you know, with an intergenerational connection, and is that you don't need all that stuff so much anymore. And then you realize that wellness is actually not expensive and it should be free. And I think we're all working towards a space where we can create reciprocal relationships in a way that, but that when money is truly flowing within an ecosystem, that there is inherent abundance in that because it's flowing and it's not just stopping in one place. And the buck doesn't have to stop with you. And so it's really inspiring, and it's just something that I wanted to touch on because I think, especially in this economy, a lot of people are feeling that it's hard and expensive to be healthy. And I just think that that couldn't be further from the truth.
Completely agree. I think food is medicine, and I think there's a movement now of like prescribing people good, healthy food. Like, well, we just talked to a clinic in town, and we did a little presentation about all this stuff. And they were like, oh my gosh, we could completely prescribe our patients a soil share or a social share, because that would be such a more cost-effective way and a more impactful way to actually take care of your health and take care of an ecosystem that you're a part of. versus going through this insane medical journey, which like I just went into, of just trying to figure out, like, I've had some health things, which I think are just related to stress. Just stress and like eating Chipotle every day for lunch for years and drinking Red Bull when I was getting in the truck for the moving company. And now I'm unwinding all this stuff that I've like coded into my nervous system. And that process takes a long time. And I've gone into the foray of trying to figure out the medical system. And it is so extractive. And you go to like 20 different doctors to get no answers and get no closer to the truth. And it just feels like everyone's just trying to rip you off. And they're trying to get you on prescription pain medications or make you take PT before they can give you any kind of real answers. And all these different things that I'm just like, wait, why are we doing it like this? Like, the solution's actually much more simple than we've all made it out to be. And there were communities that were living without the entire medical system and were living in much deeper relationship to the land and solving more complex problems. If we can just strike that balance, because there's a need for everything. I think that's the big thing, is that there is no right or wrong in any of this. It's just figuring out what is needed at this moment in time. What's the right solution for whatever anyone's dealing with? And if you can get ahead of that curve, that you're not actually trying to deal with something that's really extreme, you can actually reverse a lot of these things. I think even cancer, a lot of that stuff, maybe I shouldn't make any claims like that, but I do think we're starting to move in that direction where like food is that medicine. That's actually like the way that you can start to solve a lot of these health problems. And being on land, being around children, having connection to your elders, all of those different things, having spaces to pray, really. I think we're so disconnected from that. And like spirituality and religion has become this big bad word no one wants to talk about. We don't want to talk about politics and religion and these big things any longer because they're so taboo. But it also has meant that we've totally lost our connection to like the energy that is the divine, that's in everything. And I think we're starting to see that like the quantum field and this woo-woo magic is actually starting to become one and the same, and they're starting to be able to describe each other. And it's just so fascinating to see all that come to life now, because what was creating this otherness of like, oh no, you're over there, you woo-woo hippie people, or like you super scientific logical people, I'm starting to see, especially in a space like this, like it's all walks of life coming here. It's every single kind of faith and belief system. And actually, it kind of reminds me, we made this place into a church and we call it the Earth Church. And that's what the whole premise is.
Aj, are you saying you started a cult?
God, I know. God, little did I ever expect that this is where we'd end up. But that's what made the most sense. And I went on a crazy roundabout journey.
Well, and it was a way to protect you from certain government,
Exactly.
you know, like creating an entity like this is not coded into our, you know, our civil system in a way. And so you had to kind of find a workaround.
100%. And I was like the biggest atheist growing up. Like, if you believed in something, I wanted to challenge you. And to be here now, I'm part of the Earth Church. But I think the beauty of that is actually that it creates an avenue for us to rebuild our relationship to these ideas of spirituality and religion. That the land is our cathedral. There's no giant church building here. There's no sermons. We're not preaching anything. It's you and your connection to the land. You have an issue. You've got something that you need to confess. You go out and you talk to the land about it. It's none of us saying that we're in between you and your connection to the divine. And that the food is the sacred sacrament. Like, that's exactly what this is that there has to be a part of this that's reverent, because we've lost our connection to what is reverent. And if you have that, it gives you a purpose. It gives you a sense of purpose in this crazy world that feels so discombobulated, that you feel like you can come here and you can sit on the land and that you're a part of something much, much bigger.
It's so true. You know, I was talking to someone the other day, a friend that has, you know, about addiction, and someone who'd been recovered from addiction for a really long time. And they shared with me that really the key, like, you're actually not able to get over addiction without a connection to something greater than yourself, whether you call that source or God or Mother Nature or like whatever you want to call that. Without that connection to something greater than yourself, like, it actually, you know, you can't solve. And I think that that's a microcosm for the bigger macrocosm of whatever health issues we're suffering from, or whatever physical, mental, spiritual ailments we're suffering from. Is the prescription is really a connection to something greater than ourselves. And like that for centuries, whether you're a philosopher or a scientist or a farmer or a mathematician, can be found in the beauty of the natural world through avenues of biomimicry and farming. And I think that finally, science is catching up to the woo-woo world. And I'm really grateful to see it and to be a part of a church that's not a cult.
It's not a cult, I promise.
And it's so beautiful what you're building here. Before we close, I just want to ask, like, what's next for you and Yellow Barn? Like, are you going to create a blueprint of Yellow Barns around the country? Are you focused on here? Like, what do you want to do next?
Yeah, I think we always set out to make this concept open source. That us trying to hold this IP never made sense because it meant that there would be fewer communities that could actually regenerate themselves. And I don't think we ever have an idea to like template this and make this like the package that we sell to people. And, I don't imagine there to be more Yellow Barns as like a nationwide brand. It's like, this is what works here. And we're in a very unique little zone of the world. But what might work down the street or in a different continent or a different culture is very, very different. But I think figuring out how do you figure out what the patterns are and take those patterns and make that available to anyone to use. Like, by all means, if you can go out and make a compost program that does food distribution, please do it because you'll be a node in the network. And I think that's actually what we're starting to move to is that we're moving away from being direct competition with each other. That's just a race to the bottom. And it's always inherently extractive. But moving towards collaboration, moving towards nodal networks in a system. And that this is just one node in the network. And as this starts to develop and creates more abundance, we're starting to move into hosting weddings and just bringing in more of like a robust membership offering. This is a model that I could see being replicable. And I think a lot of people talk about something being scalable. This is not something that we want to scale. We want to replicate it. And that is actually what would allow it to morph and change based on the culture, climate, community of the people that are stewarding it. And it's not going to be me doing all that stuff. It's going to be in different languages and different mindsets and different needs. But if we can give the basic blueprint, I think the whole world could start to transform very rapidly because we're not waiting for someone else to do it. It's just us coming and realizing that, oh, I'm totally capable of doing this for my community.
Such an inspiration. Thank you for all that you're doing here and for sitting down with me today. I know that you hopefully inspired a lot of people. And, if other communities or producers are wanting to create something, are you open to people reaching out?
Absolutely.
Okay. We'll include your information. And so that, if you are a producer or community that's wanting to create this type of system or be a part of a nodal system, I think Audrey is a really incredible resource. So
thank you. It was great to talk with you.